Welcome, everyone, to the Pediatric Success Series Podcast. Our goal with this offering is to give you fresh, new, and potentially game-changing insight into recommended practices centered around, well, your practices. While we know information doesn't always change the way we do things, we do hope that it can bring about a pause, some thought, and maybe some change. Once again, I'm Shawn Rosler, podcast host, dad, e-learning professional, not to mention culinary talk show host. And as you might imagine, spare time with all those things is not a commonplace item in my existence. And I'm not going to lie, it can create some anxiety from time to time. And as always, fellow parent and OP family member, Meredith Cheryba, is here with me. And Mer, I know we share anxiety stories about our kids from time to time, right?
Yeah. Again, Shawn, I don't remember a story about our kids that hasn't involved anxiety. We're both fortunate enough to be parents to kids who have neurodiversity. And not only do we have the support system of one another or our families or our pediatricians, but we also have the OP village where we are able to learn with and grow with other caregivers who need support. So it's been a great way for us to share these stories and feel less alone in the world of anxiety. What has been overwhelming, I think, to read has been the challenges of this year's back to school season. We had, states and school districts that started going back to school in August, and we really quickly began to hear that the pandemic was being felt in a new way for our pediatric practices. And, traditionally practices in the pediatric space have about a 32% turnover in staff from year to year. This year, practices are reporting that it's been more than 50%. And when you layer that on top of school requirements for quarantining and pediatricians having to increase their testing capabilities to support kids going back to in-person learning, it's really been an incredible experience. And I used incredible, not necessarily in a positive way. You have adults and children who don't have mental health challenges. They don't have diagnosed anxiety. And kind of for many folks, for the first time, they're experiencing what it's like to truly have anxiety in these moments. And if you're someone with anxiety, or if you care for a child with anxiety, or if you're the lucky few who both the parent and the kid have anxiety, it's almost like the rest of the world is catching up. And at the core of it is our pediatricians who are supporting us, trying to give us the care that we need for new babies, for kids coming in for well visits, and all of the kids who need to come in for COVID testing or who are needing to now get their vaccines. And, we're obviously so fortunate to support those pediatricians and all the chaos that they're having to deal with in their day-to-days right now.
Yeah. Well, speaking of pediatricians, joining us today on our episode is Dr. Barb Periard. Dr. Periard is a founding member of Forest Hills Pediatric Associates in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And most importantly, in the framework of today's episode, she's a mom to 3 awesome kids. So, Dr. Periard, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Shawn. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. Glad to have you. Glad to hear everything worked out well with the hiking. Again, speaking of anxiety, any kind of falls, if you ever want to see a grown man borderline weep. I had a VR headset on once, and my kids tricked me into just the scene where you fall, and I literally sat down on the ground cross-legged. So I'm glad you're braver than I in the face of such things. But before we get too far into the realm of anxiety, first question always, whenever you come aboard the Pediatric Success Series podcast, why is pediatric success important to Dr. Barb Periard?
That's a great question. And it probably can go all the way back to when I made the decision to become a pediatrician. Definitely recognized back in medical school and training early on that parents take better care of their kids than they took care of themselves. They want to make better decisions. They want to learn from their mistakes that they might have made as a, adolescent or young adult. And they really do want what's best for their kids. And kids are our future. If we invest in them, they will be the ones who will be taking care of us when we're old and gray. And so, if we invest and put forth an effort to develop kids into healthy and mentally and physically healthy young adults, I think overall we have a better future together. So I really recognized how fun it truly is to develop these relationships with families, the parents, the kids. You're all in this together to do what you can to raise these happy, healthy young adults.
Awesome.
Well, we both know that your success, you being successful in that mission, makes our kids successful. And so, as parents, obviously Shawn and I have such gratitude for our pediatricians. We are not patients of yours, Barb, but we know that a lot of pediatricians have that same shared definition of success of making our kids amazing humans one day. But if I'm being selfish for a minute, parents need help too, right? And like you mentioned, parents are often trying to do better than they had for themselves. As an adult with anxiety, for me, bringing a baby into the world was the largest unknown, the largest change point for me in my life so far. And that did wonders for my mental health. And I was fortunate enough to have a great OBGYN and pediatrician who I could work with. One of the first things they told me, though, was to avoid the internet, that there was just too much information out there. And that when I was so stressed, I wasn't checking for sources. I wasn't checking for reliable sites. What do you guys do to support parents in your practice to help them find information about their questions when they're not coming in for a visit? It doesn't seem like a lot of time between the 1 month and the 2 month and the 4 month visits, but there's a lot of sleepless nights that happen when they're not coming in for a visit. So what do you all do to support those parents?
Yeah, that's a really challenging time. And as a pediatrician, you also feel like a cheerleader. You share stories. You want these parents to succeed so badly. And I think it does help that a lot of pediatricians, as parents, can relate to some of these same concerns and issues that parents have at the beginning. I share a story all the time of when I was with my firstborn, and this was right about this time of year in 2001. He's now 20 years old, and he was a month old during 9/11. And that stress of, what did I just do? I just brought a child into this world. And he wasn't feeding well. He was still jaundiced. He wasn't gaining great weight. I remember a day when I just said, forget it. I know they say not to drink caffeine, but I need a Diet Coke. And so I tried to open a Diet Coke, and fortunately I didn't drop him. I dropped the 2-liter on the floor. It went to a tailspin. I was still in my pajamas. It was 3 p.m. and I was soaked from the knees down. My Diet Coke was leaking into my basement. And I called my husband in tears and said, "You gotta come home." And he's like, "Why?" And I said, "I spilled my Diet Coke." And I look back on that and laugh. But at the time, the frustration, the anxiety, the fears, they were real. And I think being able to relate to parents early on in that newborn period is really important. In our office, we make sure we see those babies. When we see them in the hospital, we hopefully recognize the ones that might be struggling. We see them very quickly within a day or two of going home. And we hope that we continue to see them, and we do often numerous times in those first few weeks, to make sure that they are on the road to success and they're not struggling at all. Breastfeeding is a big piece of it. Very stressful. We think it's human nature. All mammals do it. This should be easy. That is not the case. We have lactation to kind of help them. And then we screen them. We screen every mom every time they come into the office until the baby's 6 months old, to make sure they're not experiencing postpartum mood disorders. And that's hard because as a mom, sometimes we know they might not answer honestly. They might say, "You know what, I can handle this. I'm not going to tell them the truth." But we hope that eventually they will be honest with us and they will open up and tell us, that they're struggling. And I know I do that sometimes too. I'll get one survey after another from, some type of service industry. And I'm just like, whatever, I answer it. And finally, I'm like, all right, I'm going to tell them the truth. I'm going to tell them how I really feel. So I hope that's eventually what happens. And that's why if we keep on after these parents and keep looking for concerns, and then we have a system to make sure we refer them to resources and have a whole follow-up in order to keep on top of it and make sure that they're not struggling, because you want to get them on the road to success. And like I said, I feel like sometimes I'm just a cheerleader and they can do it. We know they can do it. And we're here to help them navigate and get through it.
I mean, parents need cheerleaders, and hearing you describe all that support, I'm also remembering when we were preparing for this conversation today, you were talking to Shawn and I about your concept of a parental coach. And I got to tell you, if I was not already in love with my pediatrician, I would have enrolled as a patient at Forest Hills immediately, and I would have started flying to your office for visits. So I'd love for you to explain more about the position, what led to you guys introducing it, and how that has built the success model for Forest Hills.
Yeah. The parental coach, she has her PhD in education, and she's delightful. She's grandmotherly. She's just, again, your biggest cheerleader. And when we come across instances where perhaps it's, the child there's just something about that dynamic, and that happens, right? The children that are born to us aren't necessarily, there's nature and nurture. We are only responsible for the nurture part. The nature part is the demeanor of the child that maybe doesn't mesh with you exactly. And so there's always sometimes this parental conflict, or maybe some issues. Maybe it's a parenting issue. Maybe it's parental anxiety. Maybe it's child anxiety, but there's just something that's causing a problem. And hopefully when that is recognized by us, we refer to our parental coach, and we actually got a grant program going through our PO, and it's free to the patient at this time anyway. And we just send her to the parental coach, send the family. And I have never heard anything but positive feedback about how helpful it is to just give them some tools and tricks with all her experience over the 30 plus years she's been doing this. Extremely helpful. And again, it's all about being that cheerleader and navigating them in the right direction. Because that if you get them going down the right path, there's many paths, and many of them that can be successful. But the one that's going to work for them, again, getting these children to be successful, healthy, mentally and physically healthy young adults is our ultimate goal. And so to help them navigate that path with a parental coach is really kind of a neat tool.
Yeah. And, coaching, the cheerleading concept, I love it. But I got to break in here with the more perhaps baritone bassy voice. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the very clear, very present, and in some cases painfully accurate depiction of the unaware dad. Okay, so the disconnected dad, the aloof dad, the inept dad. I get it. We've seen it. All right. I've encountered it from day one. Proud to say most of the time I do not fit that mold. But I have honestly, and in the spirit of full transparency, I've fought tooth and nail against it. I actually wrote a letter to Procter & Gamble when they did this whole mom campaign, which is significant, but then trash dads in the next breath. And I'm like, hold up, something's got to change here. And I'll find it. I'll share it with you sometime. But suffice it to say, I said, look, stop. This isn't the Dick Van Dyke Show anymore, kids. Things have changed. We're different. I've got 3 boys. One of them has different needs. All 3 are both equally trying and rewarding in varying proportions, depending on the week or time of day. We don't necessarily wear or present our needs. I know my partner, Greta, is amazing, and she puts up the shield, puts up the armor. And if she does that, I definitely do that. I'll turtle up, I'll put the shell up and just, wait for the storm to stop. we don't wear our needs as readily as others. How is the support, Dr. Periard, that you'd provide, like a dad, either like me or not like me, different than, say, like a mom, like Mare or Greta?
That's an interesting question. Nowadays, it does seem that more and more parents, both, are coming into the office, coming to well visits, and sometimes just the dad. I would definitely probably say that 60, maybe more like 70 or 80% of the time, it's the mom. So it's hard to recognize that there's an issue unless it's brought to you, and you're told that maybe, dad's struggling as a parent, or dad's uninvolved, or, unless the mom tells you that, or the dad comes to you and says wants to be more involved. It's a hard place to recognize. I guess one place we might recognize it is screening for social determinants of health, which we do for our patients as well. We know that some of the social determinants affect overall health more so than anything, whether they're struggling for food or resources, utilities. And there are questions in there about having a support system. So if a parent is feeling unsupported, that hopefully would be captured, because you don't know what you don't ask.
Sure.
If the dad isn't there to tell you, or the mom doesn't, take you down that path, it can be a place that's missed. So you're right. From a parenting perspective, it's a harder place. I know I had a newborn in the room, and as they were looking through the paperwork that needed to be filled out and saw the postpartum screen, he looked at it and handed it, and he's like, "Oh, this is for you." And I'm like, well, actually, men, suffer from postpartum depression as well. And I, would hope, unfortunately, maybe we should think about that. Maybe we should be issuing one for both parents, because, it's something we don't want to ignore, but it probably is something that the system has probably left the dads a little bit, in the shadows as far as pediatrics is concerned.
For sure.
We could even take it a step further, and not just dads, but the non-birth giving parents, right? I mean, I think a lot of the PHQ-9 is tied to the, how you're a woman who's giving birth, or not even a woman, just a human who's giving birth, how their mind can be adapted, right, in the postpartum period. But you're spot on, Dr. Periard. I think it'd be really interesting to see what kind of information you could get from the non-birth giving parent, or, a primary caregiver, who is, still up at all hours of the night, and, still running on a lack of sleep and having to support the family and still go to work the next day. There's a lot that can come through that. And I think a lot of this conversation has focused around some of those challenges of newborn. But, when we start talking about the pandemic and everything that's happened last year with parents working from home and juggling raising their children, or just what happens when you have teenagers where kids are getting ready to leave the home, right? These concepts of parental anxiety don't stop just because your kid starts talking or walking or going to school for a few hours a day. And I think in some cases it must actually get harder, Barb, because as kids get older, they come in less frequently, right? They aren't the frequent flyers anymore who come into your office a few times a year. Do you have some advice we could maybe end on how you can support parents when you don't see them as much, because they might only be coming in once a year if you're lucky?
Right. We hope that someone's bringing it to our attention. But that is the reactive way of managing. But in most cases, someone usually is bringing it to our attention. Often it's the parent who's calling us saying that they're concerned about their child, their teenager, whomever. And even if that child is only coming in once a year, that's the red flag for us to say, wait a minute, we need to bring them in. We need to start, providing, increased acuity of care for them. And so that is indeed what happens when we get that type of call to say, hey, let's send this kid online through our portal a survey, survey them for signs of depression or anxiety. And then once they are identified, we are seeing them more often. We're seeing them at minimum 3 times a year, more often if they're struggling. But again, this is reactive. We're only going to know if they're struggling if they're notifying us. We do have a mental health care coordinator in our office. And so that's where we're starting to take a little bit more of the proactive approach of, okay, we haven't heard from you. How are you doing? And if they haven't reached out to us, then we're reaching out to them. And perhaps, you capture that unknown of the people who haven't yet called you. We don't want to get them to a point of crisis. And we tell them that. I tell so many people when I'm trying to encourage them to go to therapy or have a therapist or a counselor or a psychologist or psychiatrist. I'm like, our mental health and our physical health. I mean, you have a primary care provider. When you're well, you see them every year. When you're not, you see them more frequently. Why is it not that we shouldn't all have a mental health care provider who, when you're well, you see them infrequently, and when you're not, you see them more often? It really shouldn't be thought of any differently. It shouldn't have a stigma to it. And we should be comfortable with, that they should both be considered our primary care providers. That's my ultimate goal. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but if we can get, people to understand, to take the stigma away, and, again, with the ultimate goal of getting these kids to adulthood healthy, because this pandemic, I mean, you think about when it started in most places, March of 2020, and the whole idea when the school year more or less abruptly ended for all those kids was, okay, after the summer, we get back in the fall, it's going to be better, it's going to be different, it's going to be gone. Well, that's not the case. And I have a junior in college and I have a junior in high school. And the one thing I heard from those juniors was, gosh, I hope I have a normal senior year, because their freshman year was abruptly ended. Their sophomore year was a bust. And now here we are, right almost back where we started. And and I'm so worried about their mental health. And so I want to get them to adulthood. Well, one of them's already technically there, but, to have survived this, and this is unprecedented. And so we have to keep doing everything we can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So well said. And again, you're definitely preaching to the right pair as far as the significance of the parallel between physical and mental, for sure. We've wrapped every episode so far by hearing from a parent about pediatric success, kind of given the other side of things and why it matters. And honestly, we haven't tapped into this yet. So Mare, since you're here and, we're definitely hearing it's a passion of yours, why don't you take a pass at it? Why is it important to you that your pediatrician be successful?
It's a lot of what Barb just said, which is nice to know. I need my pediatrician to be successful because I want my child to have a trusted office, a trusted pediatrician that he can use as he navigates his physical or mental health challenges. I need my pediatrician to be successful so that our family can continue to learn and support my son throughout his school years. And, we choose to go to a private practice so that we can build really close bonds and relationships with the office. And we want them to be successful so we can continue that for maybe another 15 years or until they kick us out. They continue to learn more about kids than I do because they see it every day right now, 40 times a day. They see how COVID's impacting their school and personal lives, why the support of the community is so important. And I want them to be successful so that they can help me grow my healthy, awesome little human.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Healthy little humans, trying though they be at times. We want nothing but to see them succeed. And by that, we want our pediatricians to be successful. So, Dr. Periard, thank you so much for the incredible discussion today.
Thank you. It was a joy to be here.
Absolutely. It was honestly just a joy to meet you through the podcast. And, I'm hoping maybe we can have you on again for a future episode. So Folks listening at home, in the car, wherever you are, you can access the Pediatric Success Series podcast on Office Practicum's website, as well as the official Office Practicum YouTube channel. We hope you've enjoyed this discussion and maybe learned a thing or two, either from the parental perspective or the practice perspective. It can certainly be a challenging landscape to traverse, but with patience, understanding, and most importantly, knowledge, it can be done, and it can be done well.
And if you have an idea for a guest, or if you would like to be a guest yourself, reach out to us on the show. We would love to hear from you. Be well, stay safe, and remember, success is always a step away.